It's very enjoyable to be able to participate in the culture to that extent in the target language. Hi there, Steve Coffin here again, and today I want to talk to you about culture. This is the seventh and last of my personal goals in language learning. Remember, if you enjoy these videos, please subscribe, click on the bell for notifications, and if you enjoy my podcasts, please leave a review. We do appreciate it. All right. So I've been going through these sort of 7 personal goals when it comes to language learning in sort of a hierarchical order. My first goal is to learn as many words as I can, and that remains a goal, increasing my vocabulary. Then I want to have that vocabulary so that I can start reading. It's kind of the easiest thing to do. Once I can read, then I can make more sense out of what I listen to, so then I increase my listening. With the sort of listening, I develop some momentum, which gets me to speaking. When I speak, I realize the gaps in my grammar, in my usage, so then I focus in on grammar. It's sort of in that order. I don't start with grammar, for example. Then in my last video, I talked about writing, which can be a powerful way of improving our skills in the language. But it's not something that I've been doing a lot of recently, but I still recommend it's an important way of improving in the language. And then this all brings us to the culture, which is an important motivator for me, because the reason I learn these languages is to get closer to the culture of those languages, to learn more about them, for those countries and people and cultures to come alive for me, which they do when I have an understanding, even an imperfect understanding of those languages. Ideally, I want to approach those cultures in the language that I'm learning. So sometimes, if at an early stage in learning the language, I get too much explanation of the culture, of festivals, of special names for relatives, or any of this kind of detail in English, or a language that I speak well, I find it difficult to absorb. It's not so meaningful to me, so I resist it, because once I've had enough exposure to the language, where I've been in situations or I've watched movies where people refer to their mother's brother in certain ways, so these names for different family members, or even references to culture, like festivals, or in terms of Persian, how they eat, and the Nowruz, and all of this kind of thing is more meaningful when I can access it in the target language. But of course we are dealing with the culture from the beginning, because when we're learning another language, we're imitating that language, we're imitating a portion of the culture, because the language is part of the culture. So the language is in itself part of the culture that we're learning. But the fine points of the culture, the sort of how people interact with each other, this comes alive better when we have a better understanding of the language. And it might be through watching a movie or a series on Netflix that we come closer to a Turkish family, Arabic, problems in Egypt having to do with the role of women, and these subjects that are very often treated in movies or series. And if we can access them in the target language, we sympathize more with the people. So, and that's very enjoyable. It's very enjoyable to be able to participate in the culture to that extent in the target language. Similarly, when we have enough of the language that we can be with those people and communicate in the target language, understand what they're saying, participate in how they react with each other, participate ourselves in the target language, that in a sense is sort of the final achievement. That's in a way the ultimate goal. We want to be able to do that. But the reason I make it my 7th goal is that I feel a lot of other things have to fall into place in order to be able to enjoy the culture in that way. That's not to say you can't watch movies with subtitles. I mentioned, for example, that watching Russian movies like Zhestoki Romance at an early stage in my learning, relying on the English subtitles, was nevertheless a great motivator for me. But watching that same movie and understanding what they're saying is a much richer experience. So, as with many of the sort of hierarchy of goals, my greater emphasis at a particular stage might be on reading or listening or whatever, but there's still elements of all of these goals at every stage. It's just a matter of how much emphasis. So, at an early stage, I may resist a great emphasis on festivals or these kinds of things. But if I'm now at a stage, say in Persian, where I can read, like Sahra did for me on Link, she created a course on Iranian history, a course on Iranian food, a course on different minorities in Iran. If I can access all of this information in the target language, to me, that's the time to do it. So I tend to want to save it. Similarly, reading novels in translation is not as attractive to me as waiting until I can read those novels in the target language. So I kind of save the cultural thing, the bulk of it, until I have enough of the language, but I don't deny myself some peeks at the culture at an early stage. There are so many more opportunities for us to access different aspects of the culture today than was the case before. I've mentioned several times the Jordanian cartoon series, which is very much aimed at a Jordanian audience with cartoons. It's a bit like The Simpsons, but with sort of little morals in every episode. Hayati Aletina, Family Life, it's called. I can access that using Link, granted, sentence by sentence, going through the words. Netflix enables us to access, series where we kind of find the same family every series, and they're speaking in that language, and we're trying as much as we can to understand what they're saying. And so there's just so many more ways we can access the culture than was the case before, and we can access that aspect of the culture that's of interest to us. Far too often in textbooks, the textbook writer wants to introduce to you those aspects of the culture that they think are interesting or that you should know. Whereas I think it's more satisfying to access those aspects of the culture that are of interest to us. And that could be anime in the case of Japanese. It could be K-pop in the case of Korean. And I think, as is the case with all aspects of language learning, where it's meaningful, where you are doing things of interest to you, things that you find enjoyable, you're going to do better. And so this final goal then, the seventh goal of accessing the culture, is best done when we take the initiative, we choose things of interest to us. If we're able to access it in part or wholly in the target language, it makes the whole exercise more meaningful. So there you have it. This is the seventh and final video on this subject of my language learning goals, my hierarchy of language learning goals. So it started with accumulating vocabulary, which remains a goal. Then reading. Reading leads me on to listening. Listening leads me on to speaking. Speaking makes me aware of my shortcomings in usage. From there, I want to work on my writing in order to improve my usage. And when I have all the pieces of the puzzle put together, then I'm better able to access the culture. Now, I did a couple of videos. I have done some videos on this subject before, and you might want to have a look at them. One was called Culture and Language Learning, and the other one is First Learn the Language, Then the Culture. So, thank you for listening, and that's the end of this series. Bye for now.